And when Gulab was describing how the Vedic Rishi works with science, it's more an internal processing. And that is really a good example of how the alchemist works. So it's the same idea. And it was something that was developed in China. The Taoist sages were skilled in alchemy, as well as in India, because in India, particularly in Kashmir and the Himalaya Mountains, people were doing alchemical self-analysis, if you want, from a very early age. And historians of alchemy are still arguing about whether the Chinese or the Indians invented it. I suspect it was simultaneously creating. It's like arguing which part of the world invented mushrooms. I think mushrooms just spring up everywhere. Alchemy also sprang up in ancient Egypt, and that became a haven for alchemical thinking. In fact, the word alchemy comes from Egyptian, the name of the land of Egypt, the Black Land, Al-Chem. It's an Arabic form of an ancient Egyptian root. And black was a sacred colour in Egypt. It was the colour of the pupil of the eye. And it was the fertile soil, is dark and black and rich and gives life. But it got a bad name as the black arts. So the alchemist was someone who was slightly suspicious of. And to carry that knowledge was sometimes seen heretical. But in this Islamic world, it was very important. Alchemy has a long history in Islam, both as a metaphysical proposition, but also as a scientific tool. So the Arab alchemists of Egypt and elsewhere, they were playing with chemical compounds to try and find out how they work. And they developed equipment to do that, like laboratory equipment.
How to make gold?
Well, that was one of the things they were doing, but it wasn't the only
I
thing.
know it.
They were looking for immortality,
Yes.
and they were exploring the integration of inner and outer. So you talked about how inner and outer work. So the alchemist prays before doing the laboratory experiment, believing that affects the matter. And modern quantum physics has come back to that. In a sense, the modern quantum physicist is a kind of alchemist. And there are people in the Scientific and Medical Network, which I belong to, studying the interactions of thought, consciousness, and matter. The two are interconnected. And that's what the alchemists were trying to find out. We had alchemists practicing here in France. There's a long lineage of them in the Middle Ages, famous ones, who were doing this kind of stuff. And also in the Holy Roman Empire. One of my heroes, John Dee, was interested in alchemy and went off to Europe trying to find sacred manuscripts. There's a long tradition in Britain and Scotland, actually, of alchemy. And of course then Carl Jung came as a psychologist to try and explain it psychologically. What is it? What do these symbols and images mean? He looked at the old alchemical manuscripts of Europe, which are plentiful and exist in libraries scattered around. And he thought it's a psychological journey towards wholeness. There's a cycle you go through in the alchemical work. We're the work, and eventually we reach after. We have to face the dark night of the soul, the nigredo, as it's called, the blackening, and then we find eventually we become the gold. This is a symbol of enlightenment. That's what's born when we successfully practice the great art, which is what alchemy is called. And so it's a universal language, if you want, for esoteric wisdom, which was kept slightly, outside the official teachings of the church. It seems that Christ and other great sages were some kind of alchemists. Otherwise, how do you turn water into wine? To take one example. How do you turn bread and wine into the body of God and the blood of God? These are alchemical things. It's a mystery. So it's interesting, I think. And as an esoteric tradition, it lives on. And some people, of course, say it's all nonsense. And the only thing that was useful about it was it led to chemistry. There are historians of science that say alchemy was like a phase that we went through to get to science. But as Gulab was saying, there are things about science that have lost. Some of that inner spiritual subtlety has gone. And particularly the consciousness of the scientist as being part of the experiment. That's gone from modern science. And yet, finally, it's coming back in, as I said. So there are still things to learn, I think, from alchemy. And if people are interested, they can go to my the book that comes with the table and learn more details. Yeah. You know, and it's there in the Greek tradition as well, and in the Magi of the Zoroastrians, they also practiced alchemy. So, personally speaking, I would like an alchemical process of peace to be achieved from the breaking down of the fanatical components of violence practitioners into realising their commonality. That to me is the highest form of alchemy. It's the great work of peace. And I think the nuclear industry, you know, should talk to some practicing alchemists about ethics. It'd be nice to be an alchemist at CERN, for instance, in Switzerland, talking about, you know, cosmic ethics. The other thing to say is that the god in charge of all this is Mercury, or Hermes, sometimes called the Hermetic art. Hermes is one of my favourite gods. He's the god of communication and the internet, and he was identified with Thoth, the Egyptian god of creation. And so if you work as an alchemist, you have to learn all this stuff and learn reverence for Hermes. And that's quite important. One of the famous alchemists of history is a man called the Comte de Saint-Germain, who was an alchemist, a Freemason, a mystic, in the 1700s. And he was a friend of King James II at the Chateau de Saint-Germain outside Paris. And that's why he was the Comte de Saint-Germain. But he popped up as a diplomat trying to make peace between the warring states of Europe. The Dutch, the English, the French, they were always fighting. He was going amongst them all saying, let's study miracles instead. And it's said he lived to be 300. There are people that say he never died.
How old is
he was spotted in India.
Total European oldest history available in the Europe?
How old is European history?
Oldest part from any country.
Well, the ancient Greece has the oldest written texts, which Homer goes back to oral traditions from 1200, time of the Trojan War.
Mayan.
So it's a long time, you know. But we borrowed from even older Babylonian traditions. So almost, but you know, I think you win the ages. You get the oldest with your Vedic scriptures, but they're quite similar, the ancient Greek sages. And in England, St Dunstan was a great alchemist and a Christian. So you could be a Christian and an alchemist. And we have people like William Backhouse, who was a great alchemist. Often they practiced in secret, but we have manuscripts that have come down. And the founders of the Royal Society of Scientists were actually often alchemists as well. In that first, like Newton is a perfect example. Sir Isaac Newton was also practicing alchemy in Cambridge in his rooms at the college in Cambridge, Trinity College, where he was professor of maths. He devoted a lot of his time to alchemy, and he saw it as a divine work he was doing, and he was desperately keen on peace in Europe. So, you know, it's worth studying. His manuscripts have survived, and they're scattered around. He wrote a book on peace between all the religions, which was a presage of this table, because he argued that the original gnosis from God is like the white light at the heart of being, that then becomes coloured by culture and history, so it becomes yellow or green or red. And that's why I put the Jains at the heart as the white colour, because they seem to me to embody that primal, that real primal, you know, origin point of peace. Okay, so all of life is a constant stage of transmutation, and also sexuality is part of alchemy. The sexual practice in Tantra is part of one's duty as a sage. they weren't celibate alchemists. They because in sexuality you transform each other's bodies in a positive way if you do it right, and so that knowledge is also there in the Kama Sutra of ancient teachings, and that's part of the alchemical work as well. And there are modern practitioners who've written about all this, and that's part of the search for peace, I think. Anyway, that's the esoteric tradition of alchemy. That's very exciting. So those three, I think they fit together quite well that you chose.
What is your fourth one?
I won't do one because it will take too long. Mine is to have created the table. Mine is to give the commentary. What we'll do now to finish the last
one other very quick question.
Okay,
so
go
what
for
does
it,
these numbers below signify?
Okay, so each box, like take Rosicrucian number 50, it has two numbers, 400,000, probably at the moment, Rosicrucians on the planet who consciously think I'm a Rosicrucian. They get up in the morning and what can I do for the Rosicrucian movement? They belong to an organisation, about 400,000 approximately. In the whole of history, there have probably been about 2 million. Okay. So that's the aggregate number. The Vedic tradition, there's probably about 50 million now who are actually trained as Vedic seers. They know the scriptures, they chant the chants. But in the whole of history, probably 500 million.
Okay.
So those are the two numbers.
Got it.
Okay, what we're going to do finally to finish is we're going to invoke the gods, because there are things about life we can't solve. Life is too complicated, right? And we're just little humans. So if you shuffle them up and choose one, Armel.
Tarot cards.
Yes, these are tarot cards, which grew out of the French and Italian Renaissance. Italian esotericism said, and it said they came from the Hermetic teachings. Okay, thank you. That's one. Horus, now you choose one. You go first. Yeah. That's a good one. Servan, thank you. And now you, sir, Gulab, you choose your one.
Not coming out.
Oh, good.
Doesn't want to escape.
See what I can do.
Not this one, not that one.
Not coming
Something
out.
different.
He's come now, there he
Still
is.
not
Wow.
coming out.
It's Vishnu, yeah, perfect. We knew you wanted Vishnu. Okay, so we have, firstly, we'll do them in the order they came. We have the Nine of Fire. And this is Horus, who's an ancient Egyptian god, and was a very important god to the Egyptians. He's the child of Isis and Osiris, and he was part of the core religion of the ancient Egyptian peoples, which, as we saw, gave birth to the Hermetic traditions. And page 545, you will find him in the first volume of the works here. So he may have been a falcon god initially, and they found traces of the falcon god being worshipped. So he was a bird, but he's also represented by a single eye called the Eye of Horus. So on the card you have the Eye of Horus here, which is an auspicious symbol. In the Islamic world also you have an eye, a single eye, representing God's all-seeing vision, which protects and guards us. That comes from Horus. And even you have it on the American symbology from Freemasonry. On the dollar you have the all-seeing eye. It's a symbol of the American state. But it goes back to Horus, actually, who's the god that's looking out for us. He's protecting us from dark forces. And his father, Osiris, was killed by Set, who was the god of darkness and jealousy, actually. Set represented jealousy. But was resurrected by Isis, the wife lover, and then Horus was produced after Osiris had already died once. Isis resurrected him. So resurrection mysteries are part of alchemy. You know, it's a huge thing to resurrect a dead person and then have a child with them. It's very unusual, that. But that's what it stands for, this symbol. And Horus then represents the ascendant light of truth that comes into life, even when everything seems dark. A controversial occultist in Britain called Aleister Crowley, in 1904 went to Egypt, and he received a teaching from a spirit. He was there on honeymoon with his wife, and he wrote these down as the law of Thelema, the law of love, which he called the Eon of Horus. He said we're about to come into a new age, which will be the age of Horus. And there's a whole tradition called Thelema which still follow this and say that he was the wisest of all the modern sages. I wouldn't go that far, but he did, by the way, design his own tarot set with a famous artist, and, you know, a learned man, a Cambridge graduate. So, and he claimed to be the reincarnation of an ancient Egyptian priest. And he wrote an invocation to Horus. Now, the person, Jack Parsons, who invented rocket fuel for NASA, with which we went to the moon, and which India is using and so on, was a member of the Thelemite order, of their sort of Horus priests dressing up. So that's interesting. This tradition lives on. Okay, so what does it mean? I think we're as a planet we're poised on the edge of a resurrection, of a new birth, a new age. Horus is trying to come through, but there are some very dark old forces trying to block that. He represents the child that is going to be, you know, Herod tries to kill the new babies, to kill the Messiah, and that was the dark force that tries to kill the baby. So, anyway, if you're interested in the details, you can look up in the text. Horus is fascinating. Okay, now we come to our next card, which is number 17, Zervan. And this is what's called a major arcana. So there are minor ones and major ones. And Zervan is the star card in conventional tarots, like Aleister Crowley's tarot, that's the star. I call it, well, I associate it with the god Zervan, because Zervan is a Zoroastrian god. The Zoroastrians, Iranian people, had inherited from Zoroaster, the prophet, the sage, this slightly schizophrenic idea of good and evil in perpetual warfare. And obviously Zoroaster wants us to be on the side of good, but then people are tempted to do silly stuff. And it's part of life's rich texture. You know, the question is how far are you allowed to stray, and it's part of life. So they were puzzling about this. Why would, if God is only purely good, then why is there an evil God at all? Why is that there? You know, why do people have love affairs? And, you know, why is there any suffering in the world? So they were puzzling about this, and they came to the conclusion that actually those dualities of good and evil are transcended by a higher force called Zervan, who represents infinite time. Everything in matter, time and energy, you talk about matter and energy, but they all come from time, as Einstein pointed out. And time is infinite, but also specific. And it's a mystery. So Zervan became the primordial deity of the Zoroastrians. And of course, therefore, he's associated with the star, because the stars come from infinite time. I mean, you know, we look at the stars and they're not there anymore. It's a lot of them. It's a mystery of time and space. And Einstein explained how time and space come out of each other. So Zervan is the lord of all time and all space. And I think that card is important to come in our cards today, because we could call him the god of the Time Lords. In England we have this series, Doctor Who. It was a popular television programme where this chap travels through time and space in a little spacecraft. And in the 60s, you know, I used to watch this. And we all love it in Britain. And when I taught philosophy and religious studies, my students would call me the Time Lord, because I could take them on a journey to any place, any religion, any culture, and like they would be there, right? So I believe we're all Time Lords. That is our destiny. So Zervan is our Lord and Master, as it were. In the Christian tradition, Jesus Christ, the Messiah, incarnated to bring a new eon, a new age into being, like an avatar. And each religion has this idea of these cycles of time. So there's Satyuga descending down, finally into Kali Yuga, and then back to Satyuga. Now, who's the lord of that? Who decides when it's time to go back to Satyuga? Can we get a move on, please? It's Zervan. So I think Zervan is saying, Horus alone can't do this. The problems facing the world are too big. We need backup. And that's where Zervan comes in. And this is why I don't accept the demonization of my Iranian brothers and sisters. I love Iran. I love Zoroastrianism. I love Persian Sufism is one of the most sophisticated intellectual traditions on the planet.
Sufism.
Persian Sufism, specifically, written in the Persian language.
Persian.
Yeah, and it came into India with the Mughals. They spoke Persian. It was the language of the court. Great scientists writing in Hyderabad were writing medical treatises in Persian in the 1700s that were highly sophisticated things. So I think bring back our love and respect for the Iranian intellectual achievements. Honour what they've done. Don't buy into the demonization of all things Iranian. And realise that the star of Zervan is there for us all. You know, I was appointed a visiting lecturer at the visiting research fellow at an Iranian university in Qom for 6 months last year, because it's the only interdenominational university on the planet. They specialise in interreligious dialogue, the whole university. So they heard of my work and said, please, you know, we want you as a research fellow. So I think let's, instead of going to war against Iran like Trump and his crazy people want, we should be working on pursuing common wisdom and finding what is it in that ancient tradition that can help humanity. Because it's as old as the Vedas, the Gathas, and we
But do you
need...
think every country or religion has a different tarot cards?
I should have explained at the beginning. I mean, I don't know if you've used the tarot card before, anyone, but in this deck is unique. It's the male deities of all humanity. I've chosen from each of the religions, so each of the periodic table, the main ones, I've taken what is their main deity, masculine deity. The reason I did this is because there are lots of goddess tarots. In Glastonbury, you can walk down the street and buy dozens of goddess tarots. Everyone's into the goddess now. And in California, you know, they're all writing new goddess tarots. Nobody's thought of doing a god's tarot. And because I'm a man and because I believe in the men are needed to awaken on this planet, our energy for good, and to help the goddess. So like you, when you talk about respect for the mother, respect for the divine feminine, yes, that's our work, right? Okay, so let's come to the third card, which you chose, which is Vishnu, which is a very important deity, and the third one of the major arcana, in fact, and is equivalent to, no less than, the Empress card in the conventional tradition of the tarot, because they have an Empress figure. And I reckon Vishnu is as powerful as that card. He is the kind of one that holds everything together. And in his form of avatars is continually pouring into the world, like a divine mother, the sacred grace of healing for humanity. And in the book I give all the different avatars, starting with the four Kumaras, Varaha, the avatars of Boar, Narada, who was a Vedic sage, a travelling musician and storyteller, also an avatar. Kapila, who I mentioned earlier, he was an avatar of Vishnu. Dattatreya, Yajna, and Rishabha, and all these different avatars all have their stories. I mean, it's incredible that we have all these stories. I have a book next door about the Puranas, giving all the who's who in the Puranas, which I brought back all the way from India. And they're all sacred, these stories. They're meant to teach us. Buddha was one, you know, and so was Krishna, and the next one will be Kalki. And Kalki is like when is Kalki coming? I've had this conversation with Hindu sages, and they don't know. So it's ultimately up to Zervan when Kalki appears and how and the exact context. I've written a film script about that, which I want to do as a joint production between Hollywood and Bollywood. It would be an amazing script, Indian and American collaboration, and it tells the whole story of all the avatars of Vishnu. And they all come back at once to help save the planet now, on the theory that we need them all to collaborate and do it. You know, it's more than just one person can do now. So that's what Vishnu represents. He represents that salvific power, you know, that can restore the world back to how the pristine beauty that we're supposed to be. And you know, that's why he's such an amazing deity. And in the Vishnu scriptures and sutras, he takes many roles. He's a great musician, a healer, but also a farmer, a yogi, a teacher. And it's him that maintains the world. And that's really important. That's what peace work is about. The destructivists want to destroy the world. Our job is to work with Vishnu to maintain the world. And the beauty of song and sound is very important as part of that. So these three deities, I reckon between them, Horus, Zervan and Vishnu, I reckon we can save the planet. So I think we've just drawn it's like winning all the ducks in a row in a fairground. We've got the three heavyweights between us can tackle the problems of the world. We just have to work out the details. These tarot can show you the path, but now we have to walk it, you see. So all those Olympians that are in Paris, I send them love and blessings. We're the metaphysical Olympians here in the Philosophy Club in little old Patet. We're sending our love and blessings to because Zeus is the Lord of the Olympic Games. He's got his card as well. So yes, let's get on. In fact, he's the next card. After Vishnu comes Zeus, number 4, the Emperor. So Zeus, or Jupiter, is the consort of the Empress.
Macron is Jupiter. His nickname is Jupiter, or president.
Is that what French people call him?
No, he calls himself as Jupiter.
Is it his code name?
No, it's a kind of joke, but really...
Okay. Well, yeah. We all have to have our little foibles, don't we? I mean, Louis XIV thought he was Apollo. I mean,
yeah.
Why not? It seems to be a French thing. I'm merely a humble philosopher and a poet, but I'm very happy to share this club with everyone. Any final questions before we close? Any final comments? I hope you'll spread knowledge of the tarot of the gods throughout India. Get all your friends. You can do a review in the newspaper on them, in the Rajasthan Patrika. We can make an Indian version of them. That'll be fun. Yeah.
I have one question.
Okay, go for it, Arnaud.
It's about alchemy.
Go for it.
And you mentioned that alchemy could be used for helping and making the world more peaceful.
Yes.
And I have another reference. Alchemy may be used also for material to make cathedrals.
Yeah.
Especially, I don't know how to say in English, le vitrail.
Oh, the glass, the stained glass.
Yes, that's fantastic that we could use the matter to show the light. And one question is, what is the motivation of the alchemists?
Well, ultimately self-knowledge.
Excuse me?
Well, ultimately self-knowledge, the Delphic idea of know thyself, but also the knowledge of God, the divine within yourself. You're trying to extract the quintessence of the divine within yourself, and then that's the motivation, I think, of a proper alchemist. not very good alchemists. It's to make money, to create gold, to get power and fame, you know. But those aren't the real alchemists.
And depending on people, on civilization, the path will be different, I guess.
Yes, and you know, different civilizations have different heights and lows, and they go like in a waveform. There was a great Russian sociologist called Sorokin, who set up the Department of Sociology at Harvard University. He wrote a book about comparative civilizations when they're just and virtuous or when they're destructive and self-destructive. And he tried to analyse it in terms of like a waveform. We're all surfing, you know, as it were. And that was why the Hawaiians had surfing as a king's sport, which they're doing in the Olympic Games in Tahiti, I believe. So we have to learn to surf the waves of history, and not when it goes down and crashes, and like Brexit, Britain becomes a stupid place run by the Farage monsters. We don't crash with them. We stay on the surfboard, and then we know it's going to come back up, and intelligent people will come back into power. So I think it's important to keep faith. You know, alchemy is about keeping that faith in beauty and in light. Thanks for the reference to the stained glass windows in France. I'd love to know more about the history of stained glass art. I've stood in Chartres and it's awesome. Near here is Bourges Cathedral, which was made by the same architect as did Notre Dame. And the stained glass windows are amazing. For those that haven't seen French stained glass medieval, it's amazing. And so I wonder, what was it, these colour tones they used?
It's made out of metal, so it's crazy. Metal become transparent.
Yeah, I'm going to have to research that.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. But yes, often, I mean, alchemy and the history of painting and art, there's an overlap here, which is why Da Vinci is often said to have been some kind of an alchemist, because how can you paint, you know, such beauty without being an alchemist? So anyway, that's
This
it.
art is created from the sea waters. You see the bubbles in the waters?
Yes.
That bubble comes and becomes the particle of the sand. See, the earth is created from water. Every solid thing, even our body, is created from water. Go back there. So, this, when you talk about this alchemist, he has many evidences before him. Evidences. You know, like when you said, the earth is a matter, but it is produced, all matter is produced through the water. So, with the same principle, why our water becomes the body? The body is earth.
Yes.
In mother's womb, the body is earth.
The shape.
But again created from the same water drops. In the same 8 stages, when Veda says, the water changes into the solid in 8 stages. So whether it's the sea water changes into the earth, or our water drops changes into the body in the 8 stages. So principle is same. In the universe, everything becomes solid in 8 stages from water.
And then it turns back into...
This is what I said, the
And transforms
scientific
with fire.
approach of the Vedas.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. Anyway, we could go on. We'll have an informal discussion.
Thank you.
But, yeah,
But
thank
I
you.
wish there were more people. We could have more questions and more.
Well, it's only a tiny village, and, you know, but we have more come. But more people can listen online. This is the important.
More people mean 5, 6, I mean enough. More doesn't mean 100 or 50. No, more means 5, 6.
Sure.
Enough. For us, more 5, 6 is enough.